Hi, I'm Amber Mac. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is Pink Shirt Day. This is a day where we are raising awareness about bullying, and we have a really great show for you today that we know will help families in terms of getting your questions answered about how you can stay safe online and how to have a friendly experience online as well. So there's going to be lots of time to ask your questions. My son left the house this morning in his pink shirt. As you can see here, he is 12 years old, and like many children across the country, he was all set to raise awareness about bullying. So we are going to get started in just a couple of minutes in terms of bringing in a special guest, but I wanted to thank everybody who has already joined and who is in the comments. We're going to make this as interactive as possible, so please leave your comments. I see people in there already. Hello to Jeff, hello to Eric, hello to Chinu. Thanks so much for joining us. Most importantly, if you know a family who needs to hear what we're about to talk about today, we encourage you to click that little share button and share this broadcast so that they can also join in and have a chance to ask a question or just to join the conversation again, so we can all ensure that everyone can have a safer and friendlier experience online. So we wanted to mention before we get started that this live stream is brought to you in partnership with TELUS Wise. If you don't know what TELUS Wise is all about, it's a free digital literacy education program that offers informative workshops and resources to help Canadians of all ages have a positive experience as digital citizens. If you or someone you know needs information or resources, we have pinned the link to the top of today's comments. So you'll see that pinned and you can click on that link. It's telus.com/wise, just in case you're not watching this on Facebook, so you can also check it out. Again, this is a great place to go with resources that will help you be a good digital citizen and understand more specifically about what to do in terms of any instances of bullying, which we know is a growing problem. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing today as well. So please get your questions ready. I see more and more people who are joining in, and we have just pinned that comment in terms of pinning it on Facebook, or you can check it out at telus.com/wise. Now, as I mentioned, I see some comments coming in. Dylan says, admire the cause. Thanks for sharing. Thank you so much, Dylan. And thank you to everyone else. So drop your questions in here. We will get to them throughout this broadcast and we'll pepper them in. If we don't get to your question, just wanted to let you know that we have a team on hand, including the TELUS team, who's going to do their best to answer your question. So feel free to ask a question at any time, or if you have a comment, please drop it in there. So again, we can make this as interactive as possible. Now, to start on that interactivity, I am so excited to have a phenomenal guest today who is going to be joining us to help to answer some of those questions. We have Matthew Johnson, who will be joining us today, and Matthew is going to help us really get through some of the many questions that parents may have. Matthew is the Director of Education at MediaSmarts. Knowing that we're spending more and more time online, and we know that cyberbullying is one of the biggest issues that is impacting our youth, there is definitely a lot to get through, and thankfully MediaSmarts is a great center for digital and media literacy. So Matthew has been waiting in the wings. I want to bring him in. Hello, Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Amber?
I am doing really well. You know, I did a brief introduction in terms of MediaSmarts and who you are. I have known of your organization. We've worked together in the past, but I think you'll do a much better job as explaining exactly what MediaSmarts does.
Well, MediaSmarts is Canada's nonprofit center for digital and media literacy. We're a registered charity, and we've been around, this is actually our 25th anniversary. And what we do is we do research on issues relating to young people, media, and the internet. And we develop resources based on that research. So we develop lesson plans, we develop educational video games, and of course we develop a lot of parent resources like guides, tip sheets, videos, workshops, all things that can be found on our website, mediasmarts.ca.
Yes, you have a wealth of resources, and I think that's one of the things I know as a busy parent and someone who wrote a book on this topic, that every parent has questions. And I think one of the cool things about MediaSmarts is that we know that the questions kind of change month to month based on new platforms that we're using. I do want to give Cindy a shout out, and we'll try to get to your question, Cindy, about Roblox and Snapchat and TikTok. This is a perfect example of how all of the platforms are changing so quickly. And so it's hard to say exactly where our kids are going to be at any given time, but MediaSmarts can really help out. So as we get more questions coming in and more people are joining to watch this conversation on Pink Shirt Day, and thank you for wearing a pink shirt. We are all doing our part. The question I have for you in terms of cyberbullying, because I think when we say the term cyberbullying, people maybe aren't familiar in terms of exactly what that means. So let's start there. What are some examples of cyberbullying in 2021 that families should watch out for?
Well, a lot of cyberbullying is the kinds of social bullying that we would see in the offline world, but carried into online spaces. So spreading rumors, for instance, excluding people from a group, harassing them. But there are also ways of bullying people that really only exist online or are much easier online. So one example would be spreading private or embarrassing information or content, like an embarrassing photo of somebody. Impersonating someone online, of course, is something that really is harder to do offline. And in spaces like online games, you can actually use the game mechanics to harass or bully someone. So, for instance, picking on less advanced players. But we also, again, even in online games, we see things like racist and sexist and homophobic bullying going on. So it really is anything that is intended to harm that takes place in an online space can be defined as cyberbullying. It's also important to know that young people often don't think of what happens as cyberbullying. A lot of times they'll just think of it as drama or as pranking someone. And it can be hard to tell the difference between, what is just a little bit of conflict between friends and actual bullying. And unfortunately, the nature of the internet also means that it's very easy for something to go from a little bit of low-level conflict to something more serious.
You bring up a really great point in terms of that escalation. I think that's a question maybe a lot of parents might have as well. One of the questions I had for you, and this is something that I'm always trying to track as a parent, is to really understand how prevalent cyberbullying is. And I do want to say to people who are watching right now, if you get a chance to share the video, please do. Please keep the questions coming. So when we talk about cyberbullying, Matthew, from your perspective, how common is it? I mentioned it was one of the biggest challenges today. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, it really depends in a way on how you ask the question. But generally, when you compare different studies, you find that the prevalence is usually around 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 young people who have experienced cyberbullying. But in many cases, as I say, young people don't necessarily define things that they have experienced or participated in as cyberbullying when adults probably would, because there are a lot of reasons why it's not necessarily to your advantage to think of yourself as a target of bullying. If you're able to think of yourself as someone who is a participant in drama, that's a lot better in a way for your self-image. So we do know that cyberbullying happens at roughly the same rates as offline bullying. There's a lot of reason to think that it is underreported. And certainly it is an issue that we know a lot of young people experience. And it's also important to say that the kids who are targeted more often for cyberbullying are also the ones who are targeted more often offline. So kids who are, LGBTQ or questioning their sexuality, kids with disabilities, kids from low-income families, anything that sets kids apart, that doesn't go away when you're online. And just like offline, it makes kids more likely to be a target of bullying.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say that I know we've had some questions come in, and Cindy asked her question, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. I do want to dig into maybe some of those newer platforms that parents are wondering about, but also wanted to mention that we are tagging at TELUS in the comments, and they will help answer questions as well and direct you towards the TELUS Wise microsite, where you can get lots of information there. Now, this is really interesting. This is actually new to me. I was reading something recently that said parents are the #1 group of people that kids turn to for help with cyberbullying. And most kids say that talking to their parents actually makes the situation better. So my question here is, how can parents better understand what tools their kids are using and communities that their kids are visiting online? And I think I'll go one step further with this question and say, and kind of break down those barriers in terms of making their kids feel as though it's safe to have these conversations.
Well, the most important thing, of course, is to just have those conversations. And ideally, you want to have an ongoing conversation about your kids' online lives or online life. In the same way that you talk to them every day about what happened to them at school or anything else that they're doing offline, what they're doing with digital devices should be a part of the conversation. And so when you learn that they're using a new platform, or when they ask you about using a new platform, that's not a new conversation. It's part of an ongoing conversation. The things that you really want to make your kids aware of, first of all, is that if they bring problems to you, you're not going to freak out. You're not going to take away the device. You're not going to close the account, because we know that is a barrier. It's a reason why young people often won't come to their parents or to other authorities. They'd rather have access to these online spaces, even if it means being a target of bullying, than lose it. So they do need to know that you're going to not freak out. You're going to have their back, but it's also important to respect their privacy. And that's why you don't want to go to the other extreme of, spying on them, of telling them that they have to give you access to all of their accounts. You need to rely on trust, unless they have given you a reason to think that they need direct supervision. In almost every case, an ongoing conversation is a better approach than spying on them, than surveillance, because if you're spying on them, they're going to focus on trying to escape from that surveillance, and they're also going to be less likely to come to you if they have a problem.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things I talked a lot about when I was researching this space and trying to better understand what makes kids want to feel comfortable talking to their parents. And one of the things that became really obvious to me, and maybe we can take a second and just answer the question that did come in from Cindy, is that oftentimes when parents are using those same platforms, Cindy asked about Roblox and Snapchat and TikTok, and when parents understand how those tools work, I think also parents kind of let their guard down in terms of being less afraid of what their kid is doing on those platforms, and then being part of the conversation. Because I've seen parents who, I think what they end up doing is that they don't necessarily understand exactly what their kids are doing on these platforms, and so there's a lot more fear than maybe there should be. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, obviously it can work both ways, because you may be overly afraid of something because you don't understand it, but you also may be a little bit complacent because you feel that your kids understand it so much better than you do. And so it's important to remember that even if our kids understand the technical aspects of these platforms better than we do, they don't have the decision-making skill that comes with growing up. And they still need our guidance. So it's really good to take the opportunity to use these as a co-learning opportunity. So one of the things that we recommend saying when your children either start using a platform or maybe ask you, if it's something where they have to sign up, get a social networking account or something like that, if they're asking you about using a new platform, or if they've started using a new platform, you can ask them questions like, well, what do you like about it? What do you want to do with it? Who are you going to use it with? because in a lot of cases, that makes a huge difference. So if your kids are playing Minecraft and they're only playing with people that they know, that's a world away from playing Minecraft with people from anywhere in the world who might just randomly join a server. You can ask them about whether they know how to keep content private, how to turn off things like chat functions so that they can't receive communications from other people. Ask them if they know how to limit the audience of content that they're posting. And in particular, ask them if they know what to do if things go wrong, because almost every platform, every game, every social network, almost every online space has a way of reporting problems, of going to a moderator, of finding ways to get help, besides coming to you, of course, which should always be part of it. So it's important that you make sure your kids know how to do that.
And I think, again, just to go back to that comment about how parents often will assume the worst, right? And so, you may assume that your kid is on TikTok, and maybe this is a question that Cindy may have, and you think, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what they're doing. And then you go and look, and, maybe they're watching fun little videos about news highlights, or maybe they're following some type of passion like art. And this is just the place that they're doing that. I do want to say that Vladimir had a good comment, and we just showed it on the screen, saying, first, you must be a friend with your kids in the sense that, connect with them and try to see things from their perspective, which I think, Matthew, you nicely alluded to, and not come in with that threatening tone and that overreaction, which we tend to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we don't want to be too much best friends with our kids. We do know that it is important to be an authoritative parent, and that having, for instance, household rules about how you expect your kids to behave online does make a difference. It's strongly correlated with how they actually behave. And what we think is that the reason household rules have an effect is not because kids are afraid of punishment, because teens in particular aren't really afraid of punishment. It's because it's a way of communicating your values to them. So if you tell your kids that you expect them to treat everyone online with kindness and respect, that's communicating to them how you expect them to live. It's communicating to them the values in your family. And that has a really powerful impact. And that's an important thing for people to know, is that when you tell kids not to do something because they're going to get in trouble, most often that doesn't really work. But if you tell kids not to do something because it's wrong, they actually will listen to that.
I think that is absolutely true. And I also want to say, as someone who's in this space and who's a parent and who's written a book on this topic, one of the things I love about this conversation that we're having right now is that all of us need a refresher, right? We need to remember how we can deal with these situations. We need reminders about what we can do. Steve, I think, is reiterating what we talked about already, saying, believe your child when they come to you. If you ignore or push the problems to the side because it's online, the child may not speak up as often. And I think that's another really good point. Matthew, I do have other questions for you, but before we go to them, and thanks to Steve for sharing this video as well, what would you say to that in terms of believing your child and that listening part?
Absolutely. Anytime your kids come to you with any kind of problem, of course you want to listen. And we really can't dismiss things anymore, saying that they're something that only happens online. And part of that is because interactions through digital media have a real impact. So even if it's just happening in a space like a video game, even if it's people that you don't even know who are doing it, it has an impact because you are connected to those other people. But the other thing to remember is that most of the time when kids are online, they're interacting with people that they already know offline. They're interacting with their friends, with their peers, with their families. And so if bullying of any kind is going on, most likely there is an offline component to it as well. So that's one of the issues about cyberbullying that makes it such a concern, is that there's really no getting away from it in so many cases.
I have a couple questions for you in terms of the process of dealing with cyberbullying. And I want to thank, I see that James has made a comment, Dylan's made a comment. We're going to get to those in a minute. And we'll try to get to as many comments as possible. If you have a chance to share this video, please do, just to let other people know. My question for you is, I know that you worked on the TELUS Wise Parents Guide, and in there I was reading there's a 4-step process outlined. Can you talk a little bit about that process? Because I think for some parents or grandparents or guardians who are listening, maybe they kind of want to jot down some notes of what that process entails.
Sure. Well, really the different steps that we look at are stop, block, record, and talk. So stop means that you stop engaging. Doesn't necessarily mean that you leave, you give up on that space. So if there's bullying happening in a video game, we shouldn't tell kids, oh, well, you have to leave the video game, because we've already said that's not something that they want to do. But it can mean getting away from that person. It can mean stepping away from the keyboard for a little while. But we do know that the longer you stay in a situation like that, first of all, the more it's going to hurt, but also the more you're going to be tempted to fight back. It's a natural tendency when you're targeted to fight back, or even to sort of try to enlist allies to help you fight back. But we know that always makes it worse. And it's a really important temptation to resist. So the next thing is to block. And you can do that through technological features. A lot of social networks have the ability to block or to mute someone, and you don't necessarily have to block them. So in social networks, blocking someone is something that where they can't see your content, you can't see their content, they can't connect with you in any way. Sometimes if you're interacting with a peer, with a friend, you may not want to do that because it's kind of an aggressive option. So sometimes what you may actually want to do is muting, which is where you just you sort of turn down the volume on somebody. And the great thing about muting is that they can't really tell that you've done it. And so if you just can't deal with someone anymore, but you don't want to escalate things, muting can be a good way of doing it. And most games have a way of muting people as well. The next thing is to record and report. So even if you're not sure you're going to report, it's really important to record what's happening. Screenshots are actually one of the best ways of doing that, because it means that if someone deletes a post maybe that was harassing you, you have evidence of it. Even if it's gone from the social network or the game where it happened, you have evidence. So it's really important actually that whenever kids start on a new device, they know how to get a screenshot. And there's a terrific website that's called take-a-screenshot.org, and it tells you how to take a screenshot on any device in any operating system. And you may decide, obviously it's up to your child, it's up to you as a parent. If you are going to report, then you have the evidence to do that. And it also means if you want to take another option, you still have evidence that it happened. And finally, of course, we've already discussed that last step, which is probably the most important, and that is to talk to someone. And these are also things that witnesses to cyberbullying can do as well, because we know that witnesses can also get evidence, which can be really useful down the line, because it can be hard to remember to get a screenshot when someone is targeting you. And we also know that reaching out to victims and targets of cyberbullying is a really effective way of helping them feel better.
One last question that I have for you, which I'm going to get to in a minute, because I know I'm conscious of the time that we have with you, and we are going to talk further about what happens when a child sees someone who's being cyberbullied. So we will get to that. I just wanted to go to the comments for a second. There are lots of people who are tuning in, and lots of comments that are coming in right now. So one of the comments, Dylan says, reminders are a reinforcement. I think we've talked about that as well. Dylan makes a comment that listening works wonders. I think we have definitely talked about that in great length. James has kind of a comment here I would love to just get to, because before we talk about what kids can do in the face of cyberbullying if they witness it, James's comment is, today kids have an amazing knowledge of technology How can they protect themselves from bullying if, in fact, and this is a question I know many people have, the kids seem to be further ahead in terms of their tech skills than maybe the skills that the parents might have?
Well, first of all, it's important to be aware that kids' tech skills often are very shallow. That they may look impressive if you're not familiar with a platform, and often they're very good at picking up new platforms because it's not new to them any more than anything else. But a lot of times they don't necessarily have the more sophisticated skills. So being able, for instance, to have a post visible to just some of their friends and not other ones. These are more complex skills that in many cases kids haven't learned, or sometimes they've had to learn them the hard way. But at the same time, technical skills, can be valuable, but really what we know is that it still comes down to the social emotional component. So we know, for instance, it's about thinking twice before you respond to something. Particularly when we look at situations where a conflict might turn into cyberbullying. We know that in digital communications, often there is what we call an empathy trap, where we don't feel as much empathy as we normally would in a situation because the things that usually trigger empathy in us are either not there at all or are limited. So things like facial expression, tone of voice, body language. In a lot of spaces, you're not getting those cues at all. And even in a space like Zoom, you're getting them in a very limited way because obviously you're seeing a two-dimensional image. You've limited your ability to tell someone's body language when they're sitting in a chair. So we have to consciously remind ourselves, and we have to teach our kids to consciously remind themselves to think about how people are actually feeling, to think about, well, how might this person be feeling based on what I said or what I did? And to not necessarily overreact to things that other people said, because it's very easy to take offense at something where offense wasn't intended. And sometimes that can be because someone was being insensitive. But a lot of the time it's not because someone was intending to cause offense. And so it's almost always better, before we react angrily, to maybe step away from the keyboard, to at the very least take a few deep breaths and either let it go or suggest maybe that you talk about it in person, or ask, are you sure you really meant that?
I love that tip because this is something that I do all the time, and I will just take a break. Wait 24 hours before you respond, and it's amazing. Time can be your best friend because 24 hours later it just doesn't seem as big of a deal. So it may be something that you can just very easily ignore. So Laura says in the comments, such a great conversation. I know a lot of people are actively listening right now. But I love that idea of just giving yourself some time, and if the child can just wait and revisit it later on, it will seem like a much less severe comment or chat that's come through, and so time can be a really great thing. I promised that before we were going to let you go that we wanted to ask this question: what can a child do if they witness cyberbullying? Because this is something, again, that I think we have to think about in terms of those bystanders in cyberspace.
Yeah, we actually have done research specifically on that, and we have a great tool on our website. It's called Impact, that will actually guide you through what you can do if you witness cyberbullying. It's a series of yes or no questions about the situation, and it reflects the complexity, because we know that in a lot of cases, it's not clear who's the target and who's the victim. Sometimes you're not sure whether or not people are just joking around. Sometimes you're afraid of making things worse or making yourself the target. So we know this is a really complex situation, but we also know from our research that there's always something that you can do to help. And sometimes that's just reaching out privately to the target of the bullying, or who you think is the target, and telling them that, that you care about them, that you think what's happening isn't okay. That was actually the top rated strategy in our research. And it's something that you can always do. But there are other options if you feel safe doing them, if you feel confident they're not going to make things worse. You can try to get in between the two people that are involved, or the people that are involved, if it's more than two. And you can either try to mediate, you can try to distract them, change the subject, just to get the person, just to remove the target off the person's back. You can give the target an excuse to get out of the situation. Just help them say, do you remember we had that game we were going to play, or something like that. There are a million different strategies that you can take that are mostly about getting at the target out of the situation right there. Sometimes, though, if you think that the perpetrator, or the person that looks to you like the perpetrator, is going to listen to you, you can take action with them as well. You can almost always better to reach out privately so that they don't feel like they're being put on the spot. But you can tell them, listen, this may be doing more harm. This may be hurting more than you realize. Or you can say something like, this doesn't seem like you. It's also really important to be conscious that as a witness, we can also do harm if we're not careful. And that's particularly true in cases like sexting, where we know in a lot of cases, people will feel mistakenly that once a sext has been made public, once it's been shared, there's no further harm that's done in sharing it. And it really is important for kids to realize that it's always wrong to share a sext without the consent of the person, of all the people who are in it. Even if you're not the first person to share it, even if you think that everybody in the world has seen it, it's never okay to share a sext without consent.
Well, listen, Matthew, I know it's hard to tackle this entire topic within 30 minutes, but I think this is a great starting point. Wanted to remind people that they can check out all of the research that your organization has done over at MediaSmarts. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to continue the conversation for a couple more minutes as we wrap up, but thank you, Matthew, for being here.
Thank you. It's been great.
All right, so a few more comments have come in. I just want to address this one from Bree. Bree says, do you think that offense is given or taken, and how do you teach the difference? That is a really good point, and I think it goes back to having those conversations with your kids as young as they may be in terms of starting to use technologies, to start to understand how people talk to each other online, and really just set the stage for the fact that sometimes people are hiding behind technology in many different ways. So my opinion has always been, as soon as your child starts using technology, it's a good time to ease into those conversations, and then just to make it something very comfortable that you're able to talk about with your kids, and do lots and lots of listening. So we talked about that as well. A few more people who have asked questions, who enjoyed this conversation. Want to thank you guys again for joining us. But I want to make sure that we leave everyone with a great resource, a place where they can go, because we could be live for 24, 48 hours and still not answer all of the questions that families have about cyberbullying. There's just so many solutions to many of the problems that we see on a daily basis. So I want to encourage people to head on over to that TELUS WISE link that we've pinned to the top of the broadcast. You can go to telus.com/wise if you're watching this elsewhere. This is a place where you can find all of the resources that we have shared today. You can also go to telus.com/wise workshops, and you can see workshops for youth, adults, and parents in terms of how to stay safe on social media and how to protect your privacy as well and have a positive experience. Again, TELUS WISE is a free digital literacy education program that offers informative workshops and resources to help Canadians of all ages. And I wanted to mention that last piece, of all ages. I know today on Pink Shirt Day, we are focusing on our youth and that next generation. But the truth is, there's a lot of information here that is applicable to all of us, to people of all ages who are using any type of technology. So that's really who these resources are for, anyone who is interfacing with technology on a regular basis. Most importantly, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today, for joining this conversation. Please keep those comments coming. Most importantly, if you know someone who needs this information, just click on that little share button. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching elsewhere, you can share this Facebook link with them so they can check it out. Thank you for being here on Pink Shirt Day, and thank you for helping to all rise together to help teach families about what we can all do in terms of protecting protecting ourselves when it comes to any type of online bullying. Appreciate you being here. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon.